If you feel stuck in your growth, even though you're doing everything right, you're about to find out why. There are values you've adopted that seem empowering, but they're actually holding you back. I'm going to walk you through 10 common personal development values that create internal conflict, stall progress, and even reinforce the very limitations that you're trying to overcome. So what is so important about values? Let's first define it. As defined by Steve Andreas, my mentor, a value is a generalization about an experience that is important to you. Values are how we make meaning of life. Your values are literally how you make meaning of the life you're living. And it's through our values that we experience meaning and purpose. Even if you're not experiencing the kind of meaning and purpose that you want, that is happening through how you understand your values, how you generalize the experiences that are important to you and that are unimportant to you. So if life has ever felt meaningless at times, if you've ever felt like you lack purpose, the answer will be found in your values, which is why it's so important to get this right. I'm curious about you. Have you ever felt like your life feels meaningless or purposeless? Let me know here in the comments, because I know I've had that experience many times, didn't understand it, very confused by it. It's very unpleasant. We all have this kind of experience. So it's interesting, someone says here, before kids, yes. And I know exactly what you mean, because when I had kids, I felt a level of meaning and purpose. This is one of the most important things I'm going to do in my life, is raise these kids. But we have to be very careful with that, because something else happens when those kids grow up and they leave home, which they absolutely should. It can make your life feel quite meaningless. I actually know someone who had been married for probably well over 20 years. He suddenly was discovered for having an affair on his wife. I knew him pretty well. And so I just said to him, I was like, this seems really out of character for you. What do you think this is about for you? He mentioned his kids moving out and going to college, and he felt rather empty and meaningless because he didn't understand what was going on. He filled that by having an affair. So we want to be very careful where we put our meaning and purpose, because if there are things that we don't have control over, or things that are temporary, like parenting, it is temporary. When that goes away, then you're left with this huge void. So it's really important that you know where you're placing this emphasis and this importance. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't think of raising your kids as an extremely important and meaningful and purposeful role. Yes, absolutely. Just know that it's going to pass at some point. When you really know your values, you can always know what to do in these circumstances. Knowing your values doesn't mean that you'll never feel this again. What it will help you do is know how to do something about it. Because when our life feels meaningless and purposeless, very difficult to try to do anything to correct that or make it better, because you're just throwing your hands up in the air and saying, what's the point? There's no purpose to this. So if you know what your values, you know how to elicit your values, then you know how to change that. What I'm going to show you here is what looks like values. And in fact, in personal development, they often promote these as values that you should have. And they just cause a lot of problems. And I know this from personal experience. I also know it from working with so many people and seeing them trying to pursue these types of values and the problems that it creates. I also want to say in general what positive values are, like give you some examples of those. Positive values are things like gratitude, love, joy, happiness, and peace. You're not going to have any problems with these unless you have a very limited way of defining them. For example, gratitude. You cannot have too much gratitude, because gratitude humbles you and also makes you more open, more resourceful. So you acknowledge the good and the wonderful things that are going on in your life, and you can even take credit for some of it. At the same time, you realize you can't take credit for all of it. That's where the humbling part of it comes from. So it's just a very generative value. It's a very generative resource that we can access from within that just makes you grow more and more. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Love, joy, happiness, and peace, very similar values that are just very generative. There's a lot of possibility there. These values help you connect with others. Nothing bad here, except that at times we, maybe in trying to fulfill some of these values, we take some wrong turns, but the values themselves are very good values to go with. We do have a PDF that you can follow along with these values that I'm going to talk about that you do not want to pursue. If you're watching this video later, recorded, you'll find the same PDF below this video. One other thing that I wanted to go into, because when I have this conversation with people about values they shouldn't pursue, they'll often say things like, no, I don't mean it the way that you're talking about it. And I say, no, I know, I'm sure you don't. I'm sure you have a very positive way of thinking about this value. The problem here are implications. Implications that are implied in these values that you could be pursuing that don't come through your conscious mind, but unconsciously they're still there. And they create these problems. And I want to demonstrate that. The type of NLP that I teach comes from Steve Andreas's theory of scope and category. Everything from the practitioner training that we have, the ultimate practitioner, all the way to the self-concept model. These are all based in scope and category. When you think about what that means, scope is everything that you're giving your attention to, all the sensory information plus the structure. Category is how you feel about that scope or how you categorize it, how you think about it. When you evaluate the scope that you're seeing, how do you label it? What do you call it? What meaning do you give it? So I want you to think about this sentence. I'm going to say a sentence and I want you to just notice what pops into your mind and notice just how you feel about it. And don't worry, it's not going to be anything really extreme. Just notice the sense that you get inside you about this. Here's a sentence. I went to the store and I had lunch. Okay, and just notice what pops into your mind and just notice the general sense of what you feel about that, which is probably nothing major. Now, set that aside. Now, think about this sentence. I went to the store, but I had lunch. What is different about the two? We have two scopes. So what was different? Let's see some comments on this. I feel a break in my experience with the word but. Yep. It's negating initial intent. Yeah, it's confusing because you go, how is that a negation? But it's implied, right? And then Leslie puts, but eliminates or devalues the experience of having lunch. Maybe that might not have been the same experience for everyone, but there is some sort of negation going on there. It's not clear. Words have these powers to either separate these scopes or unite these scopes. What you probably did when you heard, I went to the store and I had lunch, is you had what we call an integrating scope that brought these two scopes together. And one form of the integrating scope could just be the day. And it doesn't have to be this, but I'm just giving you an example of an integrating scope. Two things that happen in the day that fit together. There's no conflict here. However, when we say, I went to the store, but I had lunch, there's an implication that there was some sort of conflict or something got negated, and we don't know what that is yet. But that sticks in our mind. What I want to show you here is how powerful implication is, what is implied, how powerful that is to creating your experiences. You could say, well, this is just happening in my mind. It's not real. No, your mind is what creates experience. The scopes that you're paying attention to in your mind, that turns into behavior. That turns into what you project around you as your reality. This stuff is super important. All right, so let's get into the values that we hear so much about. The reason why I brought the scope and category part into this, when I say implication, I really wanted to make that real for you so that you're not just hearing a word, you're not just hearing a concept, that now you just had an experience of what implications can do. But implications are not spoken out loud. They're not as literal. They're implied, which makes them almost impossible to negate, probably impossible to negate. And it shapes our experience in such a passive and unconscious way. Most, if not all of these values that I'm going to give you on the surface look good, but it's those negative implications that are very problematic. And actually, the first one is probably the one that we hear about the most in personal development. When you think about love and you think about self-love, let's separate the two for a moment. I want you to think about love, your loving experiences, what it feels like. What do you see in your mind when you think about love, the love you feel, the love you experience? Do you hear anything? Do you hear voices? Do you hear sounds? And just take a moment to notice what you notice when you think about love, your love, expressing love, receiving love. Now set that aside and think about self-love. What is that like when you think about self-love? What does it feel like? What do you see in your mind? Is there any sounds or voices that are associated with that? After you take a few moments to experience that, what was the difference between the experiences of love and the experience of self-love? Let me know in the comments below. We hear this so much. Oh, what you're lacking is you just don't love yourself enough. You need more self-love. So this often comes from a feeling like you've left yourself out and you've always put others, or you most of the time put others above you or your needs above your own. This comes from a feeling of always putting, or most often putting, other people's needs above your own. Now, people are doing this. I'm not saying that people aren't doing it, but the idea that the correction to this or the solution to this is self-love becomes very problematic. So what it does is it creates this internal vision. When we're talking about scopes, you have the category self and then you have the category love and all of its scopes. They're separate. When you say self-love or I need to love myself, you are separating these two as if there is this sort of thing out there called love that you can grab out there and then put onto yourself. But then at some point you have to realize, wait, this is self-love. So this is about getting me to love me. If you do that, then you've got to split yourself into two, right? And then there's identify one part of you that does the loving, and then there's one part of you that receives the love. The operation here is to get this part to give this love to this other part. Now you can already start to understand that this is a little complex and overcomplicated. You also run the risk of creating lots of internal conflict by creating this imaginary divide and saying, okay, I got to get this thing to do this other thing to me. Okay, and then you go, how do I do this? The truth is that there's you, and you are the source of the love that you experience in life. Now, you might say, no, people give me love or people love me, and that's important. Of course it is. But you can't actually receive that person's love. You're not actually feeling their love. You can witness an expression of their love. You can enjoy that, and there's no reason why you shouldn't. What you're actually feeling that you call love is coming from you. So you are the source of that love. So all you need to do is just recognize that and stop separating it. Stop imagining that you're excluded from this. You're imagining that you're excluded from it. That's what compels you to think you need self-love. And then you add an overcorrection, more confusion by saying, okay, I got to get this part to love me. Just pull the plug on the whole thing and recognize that you are love. You cannot be excluded from your own love. That is simply an illusion. A lot of us are carrying that illusion around, and it's very painful. It creates a lot of suffering. And then someone tells you, well, you need to love yourself. Now you try doing that, it becomes even more painful, typically. Also, love is inherently inclusive, right? Why would we be excluding anything like ourselves and then say, okay, now I have to add myself back to that? So it creates that internal division, which sets you up for more conflict. The duality is completely artificial. And what often happens is people go in different directions with this. Some just get really frustrated, and then they go into this whole, I don't deserve my love. Is strange to think about, especially after what I just explained. And then some people become very self-indulgent and very self-absorbed. I've seen this as well. They use the excuse, I've left myself out for so long. I've put other people above me for so long. Now it's time to take care of me. And there can be a lot of truth to that. Sometimes people need to rebalance that way and put things back in perspective and make sure that they're giving themselves more attention and time. And yeah, so that can be really good. But if you are really pursuing this thing called self-love, then you are going to find very quickly that pursuing that is very unsatisfying. And then you're going to think, I just need to love myself even more. And you'll even get people telling you that. Your coaches or your teachers might just say, you're not loving yourself enough. And then you become more and more sort of self-absorbed and self-indulgent. And that just serves to isolate yourself from others. And that's not love. So love is inclusive, meaning you are included in that. And you can love other people and you can love things without trusting them. I can love someone without trusting them with my keys, my wallet, or my wife, right? Love is inclusive that way. It becomes more powerful the more you include rather than exclude. The next one is self-respect. And again, it just sounds good, right? Oh, you need some self-respect, or you need to respect yourself more. We have the same problem here. If there's a you who's not respecting yourself enough, again, we have to make this split, and then we have to do the respector and respected, and we have to figure out how to get this part to respect that part. Again, you don't need me to rehash all the problems that come with this. Really, what I want to show you is that how this is rather silly, but this is what we have to do if we're going to pursue this whole idea of self-respect. Now, that's different than being respectable. It might be important to you to be respectable. Then that's a simple one. You just do the behaviors that you find respectable. Now, I also put on this list respect. If we pull the self off of respect and we just pursue respect, this is also very problematic. And a lot of people do this as well. They were like, I want respect. You don't control that. You don't control what other people do. So if you're pursuing a value that can only be validated by someone else, then you're basically at the mercy of them. You've just made yourself feel a lot more self-conscious, a lot more anxious, because this is something that is not within your control, what other people think of you. And people can change their mind, and they often do. People don't think about you as much as you think they do. So while you're thinking about what this other person is thinking, so much it's consuming most of your day because you're pursuing respect. And it might not just be one person, it could be a group of people, or you want to be accepted by a group of people. Trust me, you're thinking about that far more than they're thinking about you. Again, you can take this back by being respectable and whatever that means to you. And that is within your control, and you can validate that. You can be open to the feedback of others to know whether or not you're being respectable in a way that you want to be respectable. All of that is fine. But you are the only one who can validate what is important to you. As soon as you give that away to someone else, now you're in trouble. Now you're going to feel anxious. Now you're going to feel insecure. It might even turn into people pleasing, because now the validation of you being important is determined by other people. So you better make them happy. You better please them, right? And then, of course, you can't do that with everybody. Behavior that pleases one person is not going to please the other person. You've heard the saying, you can't please everybody. So you might as well please yourself. But yeah, seeking respect is just going to make you very anxious and insecure, because you can't ever control that. What you want to pursue instead is ownership of yourself, alignment with your own standards, behave in ways that feel respectable to you, and not looking for other people's approval. Okay, next one, self-confidence. The same problem with the whole self thing, but at the same time, we can look at this in a different way. When people say confidence, it's almost always implied that you want confidence within yourself. And this usually comes from a feeling of just not being at ease or comfortable, especially when thinking about doing something you'd never done before. And that's what I most often get. People come to me and say, I want to be confident at public speaking, or I want to be confident dating, or I want to be confident approaching someone who I find attractive, and then eventually ask them out on a date. And then I'll say, have you ever done these things before? And they'll say, well, no. And I think that's exactly why you're not confident at it. We're confident about things that we're competent at. And to try to fake that, to try to jump past that, is only going to create problems. And this is where you get into things like fake it until you make it, or you just fake the confidence until you actually have it. Fake confidence can never turn into real confidence. That's like saying that if you pretend like aluminum is gold, that eventually that aluminum will turn into gold. It doesn't work that way. You have to cultivate the skill or the competency in the thing so that you then feel confident about it. If you think about the first time you drove a car, you weren't competent and you also weren't confident. And that was a good thing, because you probably were more attentive, more alert, you were driving safely. And then after a while, you cultivated the competence, and therefore the confidence followed, and to the point where you can have a conversation while you're driving. You can drive to work and not even remember driving, and you followed all the rules, the laws, and you were safe the entire time doing it. And that's what true confidence is. And people think that true confidence is like slapping your chest and running around and screaming and being the biggest personality in the room. Not at all. So you want your confidence to be attached to competence. And when it comes to feeling confident about yourself, the best way to do that is to know what your values are and to align your behavior to those values. The more you know yourself, the more you're clear about who you are and what's important to you, confidence is going to naturally flow from that. And in the self-concept model, the self-concept training that we do, that is all about starting with a belief about yourself that you feel very certain about and that you like about yourself. Because you feel certain about it, that's where the confidence will come from. Because you like this about yourself, this raises your self-esteem. And so what we want to do is we want to find out, what do you value that you don't believe is true about you, or that's ambiguous. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. So we use that model. When we model that certain quality, we use that model to then map over the qualities that you don't feel certain about. And so people automatically think, then you're faking it, right? No, you're not. What's happening is, the reason why you don't feel confident about certain aspects of who you are is not because you need more experience or you need more competence in being you. By the time you're an adult, you're pretty competent at being you. It's that your experiences are not organized and structured well. This goes back to the scopes. When we can organize and structure those scopes about who you are and your experiences and what you value about those experiences, then you will feel certain about them. You will put more attention there, which will then guide your behavior going forward. So that's where the confidence comes from. So if it's about an outside activity, then it's really about building the competence. If it's about you, it's about knowing what you value, being clear about that, aligning your behavior to those values. And then you can go even further than that and restructure your experiences so that you do feel certain and solid about qualities that you highly value. That certainty is going to give you the confidence. The fact that you value it will raise your self-esteem, which is also a way of also raising your confidence about it. When your self-esteem is high and grounded, true confidence is a natural byproduct of that. And so another way of saying all of this is, you cannot go at confidence directly, but that's what most people are doing. And that's why trying to pursue confidence directly is only going to create a lot of problems. You see this when somebody acts very confident, but they don't have anything to back it up. They don't have the confidence to back that up. What do we call that? That's arrogance, right? It's funny how that is so compelling to so many people that groups of people even follow someone not because they have any competence, but because they have such high confidence. And it's like a trance. It's like hypnosis. Like people think, oh, because that person is confident, they must be competent. And we see that all the time. This is just not true. Would you let a person operate on you if you needed a surgery and they haven't even finished med school yet, but they were very confident that they could? I don't think you would. Would you climb into an airplane with a pilot who only had one lesson simply because he was super confident that he could fly? I don't care how confident the person is. I care about the competence. So confidence in that regard is overrated, but people love the feeling of feeling confident, so they'll go and pursue that directly, and then it'll create a lot of problems. All right, the next one on the list is power, and this usually comes from a place of feeling disempowered. Oh, so if I feel disempowered, then I guess what I need is some power, right? This is where implication is super important here, because when I have this conversation with people, I have to be gentle about it because they often, I think they feel like I'm attacking them. And what I will say is, okay, power comes up in their values elicitation, their personal development gurus out there talk about your power, your personal power, your power poses, right? It seems like power is a very positive thing, but the implication with power, it implies power over something. And we can't escape that implication. It's there. When I say that to someone who wants to pursue power, they will be like, no, I'm not trying to be superior to anyone. I just want power over myself. And I'll say, okay, so you want superiority over yourself. And it was like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I've already been through this earlier. The problem with this idea of being superior to yourself or overpowering yourself, again, creates that imaginary illusion that you're two parts, one that has to overpower the other part. And this just creates a lot of problems. And so when I explain that to someone, just go do your thing, which is what empowered is. And that's why empowered is usually the value that they're really looking for. Because empowered doesn't imply power over something. It actually implies like something coming through you, as if the empowerment is like this motivation that's coming through you, not overpowering anything, not being superior to anything, not trying to overcome inferiority. So that's usually what people are looking for. And then once helping them pull the plug and dismantle their desire for it, the way that they value it, by showing them you don't want to be superior to anyone else, that's not going to help you. And then trying to overpower yourself, that's not going to help you either, because you're one whole human being, not two parts, one trying to overpower another. And then they'll usually step back and say, okay, well, no, what I really mean is I want to be able to do something. I want the power to do something. And I'll say, oh, okay, so what you're saying is you want to be capable of doing that thing. And they say, yes. And I say, okay, what's wrong with just using the word capable? You want to be capable of something. Do you need to have the power to be that? Or is it okay to just be capable? And sometimes they struggle with this. And I know what they're struggling with, because with power, there's a level or a layer of self-importance that's very seductive, and that will almost always lead you astray. And I'll get into another value here that is all self-importance, and I'll explain why that is so problematic. But just know for now that when we're engaging in self-importance, we are blinding ourselves. We are limiting ourselves. We are slowing ourselves down. And at the same time, we believe that we're actually doing the opposite. We believe this is what we're looking for. We believe that this is what fuels us and makes us fulfilled, but it doesn't. And if self-importance related to power, if power was satisfying, then why would powerful people continue to seek power? It's because it's not fulfilling. It's not satisfying, but we're convinced that it is. It's very seductive that way. It's kind of like a drug. You keep taking it to get high, and you think you're being satisfied or fulfilled somehow, but then you keep having to use the drug. If it was fulfilling and satisfying, you would stop. If power was fulfilling and satisfying, powerful people would stop trying to seek more and more power. It's not satisfying. It's not fulfilling. And because of that, that propels people to seek it more and more, to the point oftentimes of destroying themselves. Charlie Chaplin once said, you need power only when you want to do something harmful. Otherwise, love is enough to get everything done. I just thought that was such a good way to summarize what I'm talking about here. You don't need power. You might need capability. You might need competence. You might need empowerment. You don't need power. So the next one, this is the ultimate in self-important value, and it's pride. I was brought up in a very religious household, a Christian household, and pride is one of the 7 deadly sins. And I was taught in a religious context not to be proud. I'm also from the deep South, where patriotism is very important. And so I was taught to be proud to be an American. I was also taught to be proud of my grades and proud of who I am. And this started to not sit right. There's something wrong there. All of the major religions and all of major philosophies talk about how pride is basically poison. And at the same time, in most societies, most cultures, we're taught that we should be proud, especially of who we are, our culture, our country. And I remember being confronted with this head on. I was 17 years old. I went abroad for the first time. It was the first time I was like alone in traveling. I met a friend in Switzerland. He was a foreign exchange student in my high school, and he invited me to go there. And we got into these discussions, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I was clearly coming face to face with culture shock. South Louisiana culture was very different than Swiss culture. And I realized too that must have been what he had dealt with whenever he was there as a foreign exchange student. And so we're going in this back and forth, and I'm basically telling him, okay, I think because we're from two different cultures, you just don't understand. And I don't understand some things from your culture. And he just finally said, Damon, are you proud to be an American? And I said, yeah, aren't you proud to be Swiss? And he just said, no. He said, I didn't do anything to be Swiss. I was just born here. And I was just like, the first time, if you think about it in terms of scope and implication, how that turned on me. And I thought to myself, oh yeah, like he's right. I didn't do anything to earn being an American. I was just born here. And yet when I say that I'm proud to be an American, it implies that I'm taking credit for everything since the Revolutionary War up until this point. And that's just insane. Like there's just no way. But that's what pride does. When we're proud, we are in a state of taking absolute credit for all that we're experiencing, at least in that moment, when that's just not true. There is so much that we cannot take credit for. Now, I do want to say, too, that there's something called dignity, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think people often confuse that with pride. It's okay to experience dignity and to value dignity, but pride is not the same thing. The implications of pride are really harmful. They're very seductive to inflate our ego, just like seeking power. We think it's fulfilling us, we think it's satisfying, but it's not. One way to look at that is both with power and pride is eating like McDonald's fast food and thinking that it actually is nourishing you. It's not, right? But it deceives you into thinking that it is because it's food and it tastes good. But in actuality, it's almost completely devoid of nutrition. Seeking pride and seeking power is the same thing. It is not helping you, but it's deceiving you into thinking that it actually is. Pride is not good because in order to be prideful, you're ignoring the context. You're overstating what you can actually take credit for. It disconnects you from humility and from growth. It often disconnects you from other people. When we're around somebody who's really prideful, they're not fun to be around because it's all about them, right? So what I often tell people, if they really are insistent about pride and how important it is to them, then I'll have them do this little experiment. Knowing now what you know about scope, that's something I want you to pay attention to. So think about something that you feel proud of. Now, I know I just told you not to do this, so I understand, but it's just an experiment. Think about something that typically makes you feel proud, that you are proud of this. I get this a lot whenever I'm having this conversation with people and they say, you have kids, don't you feel proud of your kids? And I say, no, I don't. And not to say that I never have that experience come up for me. It does, but I don't want to feed it. In fact, the exercise that we're going to do here, this is exactly what I do when I feel proud of my kids. I make this shift. Go ahead and think about something you're proud of. And when you think about it, notice the scope in your mind of what you're paying attention to. What do you see? What do you hear? Whatever the senses are, whatever the sensory-based information is that you're giving your attention to. And you might start to notice some of the structure of it. Set that aside for now, the scope. And I want you to take the same exact experience that you just experienced pride from. What would it be like instead of feeling proud, you feel grateful? You feel grateful for that experience. Notice how the scope changes when instead of feeling proud, you feel grateful. So for me, instead of being proud of my kids, I feel grateful to have my kids. I feel grateful that I get to be their father. And if anyone would like to share the differences in scope, and you can keep it simple. Does one have more information than the other as a whole? So Kelly says, pride, the focus is on me and what I did. Yes, gratitude is a wider scope and includes other people, circumstances that helped me get there. Yes, what a great way to summarize that. I feel grateful and fortunate to be British. Okay. Gratitude is a much larger scope, right? Which one feels more resourceful, pride or gratitude? Yeah, it's an easy one, right? It's gratitude. Are you any worse off for, instead of feeling pride, feeling grateful for experiences, even accomplishments? No, you're not. It's more fulfilling. It also opens you up to more possibility, and you go, oh, yeah, okay, I can go do this or I can go do that. Whereas pride, I'm like at the top of the mountain, and anyone or anything coming up that mountain is a threat to me. It's not very useful. And then we could take it even further and say, try to feel both pride and gratitude at the same time. And it's really something you can't do, because all that you're focusing on in pride is a smaller scope within the larger scope of gratitude. So you can't do both at the same time. You can only do one at a time. I'm going to have to move a little bit faster here, and I think you're starting to get this. I don't have to go into as much explanations here. Gratitude is attracting more examples of being grateful. Yeah, it's generative, right? Whereas pride is not. Let's talk about discipline and willpower, because this comes up all the time. I think it's really, this whole hustle culture thing to a certain extent is a good thing, but there's definitely a very toxic and dark side of it once you pass a certain threshold. This comes from is usually first a feeling of disempowerment or feeling like you're not in control. And then it comes from also a need to parent yourself. We grow up with parents, right? And then when we get out of the house and we're on our own, that piece is missing. And so what oftentimes people will do is they'll fill in the void and they'll treat themselves like a kid. And this, again, this is the split, right? One part of you is the parent trying to do the disciplining and the willing and all of that. And there's the child has to be disciplined. So when we talk about discipline, a lot of times people will put that word in front of discipline, self-discipline. So just take a moment. What do you think of? What comes to mind? What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word discipline? Notice the scope that pops into your head. And then ask yourself, is that positive? Is that something you really want? For most people, no. When I think of discipline, I think of my parents disciplining me when I was a kid. I think of teachers disciplining me when I was a kid. It's not pleasant, but people will go, but that's what I need. And that's when that whole parent role is coming through. That's what little Damon needs. He needs to discipline himself. He needs to will himself to step up, right? Well, no, we can just be a grown-up. We can just be an adult, right? We can integrate the parent-child within us and just know what it is we need to do, have clarity about that, and then go do it. Disciplining yourself, again, creates that me who does the disciplining, and then there's this other me who is disciplined, parent-child. Same thing with willpower. Willpower implies that you have to will yourself against yourself. So it implies a fight with yourself. Remember, I'm going to keep saying this, implications shape so much of your experience. When we don't think about these implications, that's what makes them even more powerful, because we don't realize how they're shaping our experience. This whole idea of willpower is implied that you really don't want to do something, and then you're having to will yourself to do something that you don't want to do. So you're fighting yourself. And people actually become very successful by willing themselves to do it, by fighting themselves, getting into a fight with themselves, submitting part of themselves, defeating part of themselves. But if you think about it, like in a civil war, no side really wins, because you're fighting yourself. You're destroying yourself. It's like an autoimmune disease. The very thing that's supposed to protect you from disease is actually destroying you. That's what discipline and willpower will do. And the easy fix to this is to just get clear about what it is that you want. When you're clear about what you want, you don't need willpower or discipline to get it. You don't need to fight yourself to get it. All you need is focus and organization, not willpower, not discipline. I think that's what a lot of people will say too. It's like, well, no, when I mean discipline, it just means, being focused and organized. Okay, well, just be focused and organized. That's all you have to do. The analogy I use a lot of times is, if you were starving and I put your favorite food in front of you, would you then go, gee, I don't know if I'm disciplined enough to eat that food, or I don't know if I have the willpower to eat it. No, you would not think that. You have the clarity, you have the desire, the hunger, you have the clarity of the food that you like. There's no question, you just do it. And oftentimes when people come to me saying this about, I need more discipline and willpower, I'll say, do you brush your teeth? They do, twice a day. And they'll say, yes. And I say, how long have you been doing that? Ever since I can remember. And I'll say, well, how do you have the willpower and the discipline to do that all throughout your life, day after day? And they'll go, it doesn't really take willpower and discipline. And I say, exactly. It's already settled. You want clean teeth. You want good breath. You want to keep your teeth for as long as you possibly can. You're not negotiating this every time. It's settled. You're clear about it. You know that's what you want. You just do it. When it comes to the things that you want to create in your life, that's how you want to focus on it. Be very clear about what you want and be settled in it. Integrate any objection or resistance, or satisfy any objection or resistance. And you don't have to will yourself. You don't have to discipline yourself. This is also where your values are really important, because your values are your motivation. So if you just have a goal in front of you and you say, yeah, I'd love to have that, but you don't really understand the deeper values that are driving the want for that, and you're not connected to that, then yeah, you'll run out of motivation simply because you don't know what your motivation is. That's why it's important to do value solicitations. using willpower and discipline, it's like a muscle. You can strengthen it, but it will wear out at a certain point. And this is what often leads us to burnout. And you just don't have to do that. There's a better way, just getting clear about what you want. And you don't need to fight yourself. That's the other thing. And I did that for so long. And looking back on it, like this idea, because people would say that a lot, wow, you have a lot of willpower, you have a lot of discipline. Sometimes that was true, but sometimes it was just me doing things that I enjoy doing, which made no sense to me. There's no willpower or discipline. I enjoy doing what I'm doing. But there were times where I was in an all-out war with myself to get myself to do something. And even if I achieved it, it wasn't very fulfilling because I had to fight myself every step of the way. And it also meant that part of me was unfulfilled. So I had to fight that hard to be somewhat fulfilled, not completely fulfilled, when I could have just pulled the plug on the whole thing and not fight myself, just get clear about what I want and go and do it. Even people who seem to have a lot of willpower and discipline, it's not fulfilling or rewarding even when you get what you think you want. All right, the next one, deservingness. And this almost always comes from self-worth issues. This need to earn your right to exist, the need to earn love, which means then that love would be conditional. The trap here is that it implies that life is fair or that you're owed something. But we all know that life is not fair. We don't live in a meritocracy. We're born into this world naked, with nothing, no guarantees. Deservingness is a concept that's human-made. And that's not to say that there isn't a place for it when people do work for things and then they get what they want. We live in a society and a culture that enables that, because if we don't feel like we're getting what we deserve based on the rules of society, the rules of a government, then we have a lot of problems. But that's different than when we're pursuing our goals and fulfillment in life. If we're caught up in this idea of whether or not we deserve it, it's just going to take us down. Because first of all, there's no way to quantify that. How would you know it if you deserved it? And people might even make up some ideas of what do I have to do to deserve it? And this idea of, okay, if I achieve X, Y, Z, then I must deserve it. But then you achieve it and nothing feels any different because there's no way to fulfill deservingness. And then you go, well, I guess I need to achieve more. And then you keep doing this and you're on this treadmill for a long time, and then you end up accomplishing a lot. And then you look around you and you feel no more deserving than you did when you started this whole thing. But now you've got all of these wonderful things, all of these wonderful successes, and you still don't feel like you deserve it. What happens? You will find a way to get rid of it. You will find a way to lose all of that you've acquired, all of the successes that you've had, unless you deal with this issue. And that's what imposter syndrome is. You have all of these things, but you don't feel like you deserve it. Now, the other way that this happens is you never achieve anything because you feel like you don't deserve it. You feel like you have to first deserve it before you can achieve it. It's easy for me to say to just drop this as a value, but most people, what this takes is deeper work. This usually comes from an imprint. Like I said, it's a self-worth issue, which means that at some point in our lives, when we deal with self-worth issues, the origin of it is usually a parent or someone who gave you unconditional love. And at a certain point in your life, usually before the age of 7, because that's when our personalities are still developing, someone communicated to you in a way that made it seem like love was conditional, like comparing you to someone else. If you got compared to a sibling, why can't you be more like your sister? Or why can't you be more like your brother? Or why can't you be more like the kid down the street? Then this idea comes into our minds of, oh, now all of this love that I just assumed was unconditional because that's the way it was given to me, now it's conditional. Now I have to earn it. Now I have to do something to get it. And then it starts in that whole deservingness. I was just working with someone where this was one of his issues, and he wasn't accomplishing what he wanted to accomplish because he wasn't sure that he deserved it. And so we got back to the origin of where this started. What happened was when he was a kid and he didn't get what he wanted, and so now he's upset about that, he's crying, or he's in some level of suffering, something we all go through. And it's good to learn this early when we're a kid, that we don't always get what we want. And we have to learn how to manage that negative feeling. Most of the time we're pretty good at, as kids, getting over that and moving on with life. But what his parents would do, and I'm sure they were well-meaning, they would say, you didn't deserve it. And so this kid, trying to manage this negative emotion, doing the best that he can to manage it, has the meaning makers in his life, his parents at that time, because that's who kind of sets the tone and the meanings of our lives when we're that young, comes in and says, the meaning of your suffering is that you did not deserve it. What does that do to a kid's mind? It does exactly what it did to this guy who's 40 years old, still wondering if he deserves the success that he wants, and it's holding him back. That's how these ideas and these implications can get stuck in our minds and then hold us back and limit us. If these feelings are coming up, of deservingness or not deserving, ultimately what you want to do is some deep work to re-imprint those imprints. And that can take quite a while. That can take up to years. But in the meantime, just don't engage the conversation with yourself at all. just say, okay, I know this isn't a real thing. There's no way to quantify whether or not I deserve something. So I'm just going to go do what I want anyway. I'm going to work toward this anyway. What you can do is you can act as if. You can act as if there's no such thing as deserving, even if you don't truly believe that. It might take a while to dissolve that belief. All right, number 8, fulfillment, satisfaction, meaning, and purpose. So I put all these together because we're very conscious of wanting fulfillment and satisfaction and meaning and purpose. We tend to want to go at that directly. And there's so much out there in personal development that says to do exactly that. Like they have some sort of direct path that they can show you directly to fulfillment, satisfaction, meaning, and purpose. And that's just not how it works. Trying to go after that is, again, like trying to go after confidence when you're not competent. You can only fake it. And of course, faking it is not the real thing. Fulfillment, satisfaction, meaning, and purpose, there's nothing wrong with these. Which what I would say is not good is to try to pursue them directly. The only way to really do that is to know what your values are, to know the more specific values that are important to you that you need to align to. When you do that, fulfillment, satisfaction, meaning, and purpose are the byproduct of that. Just like confidence is the byproduct of being competent. If you're fixated on going directly to it, it's going to lead you down a lot of wrong turns. And it will be ultimately very frustrating. And at some point, some people often then just try to fake it. Again, faking it is not going to do it for you. Or living in some sort of fantasy world that it's actually happening when it's not. What I'm getting at here is that these, as values, they're too vague, too general to pursue directly. What you need to know is what are the values, more specific values that you need to fulfill. And when you do fulfill those, especially multiple values at one time, fulfillment, satisfaction, meaning, and purpose are all the byproduct of that. When I was learning self-concept and I was actually using it to transform, and I went to Steve and I was like, okay, so I can just like basically grab any quality off the shelf, so to speak, and just transform it. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, where do I even start? Do you have a method for that? Because it's so overwhelming to think about. I can just grab any quality and just transform it. And he was just like, yeah, pretty much just do that. It wasn't until I brought Mark Andreas over to teach core transformation that I saw a values elicitation combined with an actual NLP model. And this is one of those things I'd been looking for because I knew how important values elicitation was, but in every NLP training I'd gone to, they kind of just, okay, we elicit your values, and then they don't take that any further. And I was just like, it seems like there's a lot more here that we should be working with. And when I saw Mark teaching core transformation, that's exactly what that model does, is it takes values elicitation and then takes it so much further. And I was like, well, okay, I bet I could combine that with self-concept. I wonder what would happen. Maybe that's what I've been looking for. That gives me a methodology of what to follow. And one of the things that Steve would teach is that the higher the value for you of a value, the better you're going to feel, the more fulfillment and self-esteem you're going to experience when you fulfill that value. And that's because it's a big value, like freedom, joy, happiness, real big values. So when you align to that and you experience that, then it's going to be really fulfilling. Whereas something like fun, small value, important, but it's not as big as, say, freedom, joy, and happiness. When you fulfill it, it's fulfilling, but you're not going to get meaning and purpose out of fun. But if you combine big values like joy, happiness, peace, freedom, and you're fulfilling all of those at one time, yeah, there's going to be a lot of fulfillment. There's going to be a lot of purpose. There's going to be a lot of meaning in your life. I grew up, like I mentioned, in a very strict religious household, being taught that the only way that I would ever experience purpose and meaning in my life is if I followed this religion. But I had very clear examples, scopes all around me that this was not true, because it seemed like the more they followed the religion, the more miserable they were, and also very hypocritical. They would say one thing and do another thing. Even though I hadn't sorted all this out for myself, I just instinctively knew that this was not it. This is not the kind of purpose and meaning I wanted in my life, because either I have to be a hypocrite and I have to be miserable. Not working for me. So I let the religion go, and I just thought that this kind of meaning and purpose kind of thing was just something that sounds good. We all would love to have it. Maybe some people do have it, but it's just not me. And I feel like I'd have to fake it or make it up to have it. And if I have to fake it, then it's not real. When I took the values elicitation process and I used that to identify what were the most important values to me, and then I cross-referenced them as qualities of who I am, I quickly realized I didn't feel certain about being any of these values as certain and solid qualities of who I am. So that indicated for me right there where to do the work, where to do the self-concept work. I went one by one and just started transforming each one of those values into qualities of who I am. And it was like my life exploded. Everything just changed so rapidly. I'm talking about in a matter of months. And at the same time, I experienced this very strange thing that I had never experienced before, this compelling sense of purpose. that had very little to do with what was going on around me and had everything to do with what I was feeling inside and what I was being compelled to do, what I was motivated to do. I'd never experienced that in my life, and I'm happy to say that has not wavered since. And this was like 10 years ago that I did this. So it's really the combination of your values, fulfilling the combination of your values. And if you want to take it even further, which I recommend that you do, becoming those values as certain solid qualities of who you are. Then you will get this sense of purpose and meaning that is not dependent on things around you. Like we were talking before, someone mentioned that when they became a parent, then they felt that sense of purpose. Again, your kids are going to grow up. You're not really going to be a parent anymore. To some extent you will be, but not in the sense that you were when your kids were born. That's a purpose that's dependent on something outside of you. What you really want is to have that sense of purpose that comes from within you, that is not dependent on the world around you or other people, that you experience it and validate it for yourself, and then no one can take that away from you. So your purpose is solid and it will be there until you pass. Okay, comfort. This is a very common one. Again, it's very seductive. It feels like a good solution. Comfort is very accessible. So oftentimes we will short sell our happiness to go to comfort because I can always pull up TikTok and just doom scroll, and that's going to be comfortable. And I can always sit down and binge Netflix and eat and drink all I want. And there's going to be some comfort there, but it's not lasting. It's very limited. There's not really any true fulfillment in it. It's more like a temporary distraction. Now, we all need a certain amount of comfort. We can't be uncomfortable all the time. If we're uncomfortable all the time, we can't really reach those higher values. A certain amount of it is important, but it's not going to fulfill you. You want to have enough comfort so that you're not uncomfortable, and then you want to then reach for those higher values. And when you're really reaching for those higher values and you're fulfilling your potential, you are going to have to get uncomfortable. That's what growth is. You can't have growth without being uncomfortable at times. But you can be comfortable in knowing that that uncomfortableness is in the fulfillment of your higher values, which leads to greater fulfillment. You can kind of reframe the uncomfortableness as a certain, taking comfort in the fact that the discomfort is growing you. It's helping you reach higher and higher levels of fulfillment. And the truth is that when you really are aligned with these higher values, the discomforts that you might experience along the way, they're put in perspective. They're very minor compared to the fulfillment that you're getting out of it. But I do know people, and I did this for a while too, will default to comfort because it's easy and it's fast and it's very accessible. But it's always going to get, that kind of comfort is always going to get in the way of your growth and your greater fulfillment that you could have. Somebody had mentioned in one of our communities that they realized that they wanted confidence, and that the key to confidence was to be comfortable, and that they were only going to stick to the things that we're going to focus on being comfortable about things and only sticking to those things. It's okay, then you will never grow if you only stick to the things that you're comfortable with. Growth implies that you get out of your comfort zone. Self-esteem versus self-worth. So we want to be very clear about this. We do want to pursue self-esteem, but we cannot do that directly. We can only be done through our values. If kindness is a value of yours, when you align your behavior to kindness, meaning when you're being kind, you're going to experience self-esteem because you're doing something that you value. So therefore, you like yourself. And the great thing about self-esteem is that you validate this. You're the one validating it. You don't have to depend on other people to validate the fact that you were kind. You can do a kind act because kindness is important to you. And when you do it, you're going to feel good about it. And the same thing with like your successes. With success, I would make sure that you're putting the attention on the behaviors that you're doing rather than the outcome, because outcomes are not completely up to us. And so you can behave in a successful way, meaning doing behaviors that are leading you toward the success you want to achieve, and you will feel good about that because you value success. This is very different than self-worth. As I already mentioned with the whole deservingness thing, that's rooted in a self-worth issue, and I already mentioned where that comes from. At some point in your life, it was communicated to you in a very limited way that love might be conditional, and it put that idea in your head. So then you start chasing this idea of self-worth, to increase my worth, to earn what I want, to earn love, respect, and all of those things. Worth is the implication there. And again, I'm going to bring our attention back to implications and the scopes that it creates. Worth implies a measurement of value. So when you pass your reality through this concept of self-worth, what you're basically saying is that you need to measure your value, which is impossible. There is no instrument that can measure anyone's value. Some people say, well, in the marketplace, I'm not talking about the marketplace because that's not what we're feeling when we're talking about self-worth. It's about our existence. You want to feel worthy to exist. That's where that whole self-worth thing comes from. And then because we're talking about a word that implies a measurement of value, you're going to seek ways to measure that. And because this is really more a metaphor than something real, And you'll see this over and over. When metaphors are taken literally, it causes a lot of problems. And we see this, say, in the Bible. And I'm not trashing the Bible or Christianity or anything like that, but there's a lot of metaphors in it. And those metaphors are meant to teach, because that's what metaphors do really well. They're very powerful in teaching powerful meanings. But then when we start trying to take those metaphors and apply them literally, then you get people doing some really crazy stuff, like fundamentalists who get violent or something like that. That is a byproduct of trying to do something that you can't. Apply a metaphor literally. When we try to apply this metaphor of worth literally to ourselves, it becomes very destructive. And we look for ways to try to validate that. Comparing ourselves to others is probably the most common, and that will never serve you. You can compare maybe your success to someone else's to figure out what they're doing so that you can map across or use some of the things that they're doing, like modeling and all that. But that's different than when you're talking about like this sense of worth to exist. Am I worthy of existence? Is that person better than me, or am I better than them? That can never be measured, and that will only serve to bring you down. Because if you're comparing yourself to people you feel superior to, now you're in that superiority-inferiority problem, and you can't turn that off when you encounter someone you perceive as being better than you or superior to you. And that will make you feel very small. And you're going to do these ups and downs and this whole roller coaster of, am I worthy? Am I not worthy? I don't feel worthy. And then again, it's just a lot of noise that creates a lot of suffering. The faster you dissolve this idea entirely to the point that it just doesn't even make sense anymore, you're not going to be truly free. When I came face to face with realizing that a lot of what I was suffering from stemmed from this self-worth issue, I went to Steve and I said, I think this is what I'm suffering from. And of course he said, I wrote about that in my book and this chapter, this page number. And so I went and read it and I was like, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but how do I solve this? And it was through transforming these qualities that I value. And if you do that enough times, you squeeze out the whole idea of self-worth. It just doesn't make sense anymore. Also, along the way, I had to re-imprint a lot of imprints. The things that gave me the idea that there was such a thing as self-worth, I had to go back and re-imprint those. A combination of re-imprinting and then becoming the qualities that I value. At this point, like, to even think about whether or not I'm worthy, to ask the question just does not even make sense. That's what I would recommend for all of you to work on that. If you are feeling these feelings of low self-worth, high self-worth, and it goes back and forth, ultimately what you want to do is dissolve this entirely. It doesn't make sense. It does not serve you. Any attempt to increase your self-worth will only feed this problem and make it worse. You're just breathing life into this erroneous concept. Now, self-esteem, that's what you want to go at, but you can't go at that directly. You have to go through your values to increase your self-esteem. Now, I did put a number 11 on the list, skills and abilities as values. A lot of times people make the mistake of thinking of skills and abilities as values. You want to make sure you make a clear differentiation between these. Values are generalizations about experiences that are important to you. Skills and abilities are things that you have to cultivate. You don't have to cultivate your values. They're already there. This is how you've organized your life in such a way that you know what's important to you and what you want to pursue and what experiences you want to create more of in your life. You don't need to cultivate that. Now, you can become clearer and clearer about that. You can explore that, which I recommend that you do. But that's different than skills and abilities. You have to cultivate skills and abilities. That takes time. That takes practice. We can't skip past that part. Now, I realized too that there is one value that I didn't include here. I was working on my book earlier today and I was like, you know what? I don't think I included this one. And it's one that comes up a lot in people's values elicitations. And that is the word hope, the value hope. And again, it's one of those ones that, like, you think, how could there be anything bad about hope? Let's go back to implication. Now, some of you may have already heard me talk about this. If you've heard me talk about this, then I don't want you to answer, let other people answer. Knowing everything that I've talked about with implication, when you hear the word hope, you probably have a positive connotation to that, or you think about that positively. But I want you to look a little bit deeper. When you think about hope, what is the implication in hope that makes hope not a good value to pursue? Let me know in the chat box here. You guys are thinking about this stuff. Yeah, hope implies hopelessness. When you hope for something to happen, we can do this experience. I want you to think about something you hope happens in your life. Just pay attention to the scope, pay attention to how you feel. Now switch out hope to, I want this to happen in my life. What's different? What's different about the scope? What feels different? Yeah, so what makes it feel better? So I'll just tell you my own experience. When I hope for something to happen, I feel completely disempowered and have no influence over whether it happens. It's hopeless. That's what you do when you feel hopeless. You hope. But if I want something to happen, immediately my mind goes, okay, how do I do that? It puts me in an accountable role. It makes me responsible for making this happen. But if I say, I hope I make $1 million someday, it's just like it makes me think of playing the lottery, right? Which is hopeless. But if I say I want to make $1 million, then I go, oh, okay. So what's the first step? How do I go about doing this? It's active. It makes you responsible. Anytime you feel like you're hoping or you say, I hope that, stop yourself, realize what is happening here. What do you feel hopeless about? And then how do you change that? How would you change that so that now you're an active participant? Now you're responsible for this outcome. So it's not to say to take all hope out of your vocabulary. I can say, I hope it rains. I'm okay with that because I don't control the weather. And I don't exactly feel hopeless when I think about that. It's just like a hope, something I don't control. And so I hope that it does. I think that's perfectly okay. What we're talking about here is what you want to create in your life. And if you find yourself saying, I hope, that should immediately set off the alarm that you're coming from a place of hopelessness. And you should immediately go to that and say, okay, what do I need to do here that puts me in a responsible role of making this happen? That now I have influence in making this happen. Or maybe I have complete control of making this happen. Like I said, a lot of outcomes are not fully dependent on you. So we want to put our attention on what are the behaviors that I want to engage in, behaviors that align with my values. Sometimes we do have control over the outcomes. If I say I want to work out today and that's the outcome, I can make that happen. But if I say I hope to work out today, it sounds very shaky, very iffy, don't know if it's going to happen. And there's an element of hopelessness there because I feel like I'm not in charge, I'm not in control. If you notice that any of these values are popping up in your values solicitations, it does not make you a bad person. It just means that somewhere along the way, you took on some of these values. And oftentimes, by the time people get to us, the self-concept research group, they've been through a lot of personal development. I think we're usually not the first people that people come to whenever they get into personal development. We're usually the place people go to as a last resort when they've tried all of these other things that aren't working. And then they finally come to us and then we're able to give you ideas and understandings as to why these things haven't been working for you. And this is what I'm doing here with these values. A lot of personal development teachers will teach you specifically to pursue these values. I'm telling you right now, you're setting yourself up for a lot of problems if you're going to pursue these values. What we want to do is we want to acknowledge when these values pop up in your value solicitation, and sometimes they will, even power still pops up in my value solicitations. I don't go, oh no, I can't do that. I don't push that aside. Or like when pride comes up, or even when I experience pride, I still experience pride. We're all human, right? So I don't go, oh no, I'm not supposed to experience that. That's not how we want to deal with it. What I say to myself, and it depends on the situation and depends on the value, but one thing I know for sure is for something like power and pride, there's a lot of self-importance loaded into that. So what I'll ask myself when I'm feeling proud, I say, if I were to remove the self-important aspect of what I'm feeling right now, what am I left with? And almost always I'm left with something so much better, so much more fulfilling, so much more resourceful. And almost all the time when I do that with pride, I'm left with gratitude. Power could be different things, but the same thing. Remove the self-important aspect of power. And what do I want? Oftentimes it's going to be empowerment or capability or motivation. It's more about taking, when these values come up, it's more about taking what's good and then separating it from what's not good. When it comes to self-love, just drop the self. You don't just be love. You are the source of that love. It's all inclusive. The problem was thinking that you were ever separate from it, not that you have to now try to get yourself to love yourself. That's a lot more work and it doesn't work. When you want confidence, ask yourself, what do I want to be competent at that would give me that confidence? If it's public speaking, I got to get out there and do a lot of public speaking. Yes, it's going to be uncomfortable, but this is how you cultivate the competence. And then as a result of the competence, you're going to feel confident. I don't want you to think, oh, I'm just not supposed to pursue these and I'm just not supposed to feel them. Find out what's behind it. Go deeper with it. Remove the self-important aspects of it. Remove the destructiveness of it. Or like in the case of hope, when you remove the hopelessness out of it, you don't need hope anymore. You go, yeah, I don't need that. I'm in charge here. I can do things here. I use the word trust as a replacement for hope. I trust that this is of use for you. That could work. It might not work all the time though. Different situations will call for possibly different values. This is not the definitive list of all values you should avoid. These are just the ones that really come up very commonly. I find that they're often being taught directly to follow these values, and I'm just always shaking my head like this. I don't think people are like trying to do it in a bad way. I think most people are well-meaning who teach these things. They just haven't explored it enough to really understand the negative side of this. I recommend that you make getting clear about your values a lifelong pursuit, and know that you can only get so clear about them by working it out on paper. The way to really get clear about this is to take action. It's taking values, say, like happiness, and asking yourself, because a lot of times people tell me to say, I don't know what I want. And then I say, then would you say that you want to know what you want? And they'll say, yeah. And I'll say, okay, then you know what you want. You want to discover more of what you want. And when it comes to your values, you can spend the rest of your life discovering what makes you happy, what makes you joyful, what puts you at peace, what are you passionate about. As long as you're alive, there's more possibilities to explore and discover. And it doesn't mean you need to be jumping around from one activity to the next. Sometimes it's about how deep do you want to take a particular activity. With me, I'd been practicing yoga for a long time, and I did reach a point where I was like, okay, I've been doing this 5 to 6 times a week. I've reached that point of satisfaction. I don't want to let my yoga practice go, so I'm going to do it a few days a week, but I'm going to go explore this other thing. And I got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I'm at the point now where I'm not sure how much further I want to keep pursuing this. I'm a purple belt right now. Do I want to go to black belt? Maybe. I'm still enjoying this. I'm still seeing how deep and how far I want to go with it. And if I ever reach that point where I feel like I've reached a satisfaction with that and I want to move on to something else, that's fine. That's good. Because really high level values have so many possibilities in them, you can never get bored exploring them. There's a never ending possibilities in just going on and discovering what makes you happy and joyful and all of the values that you elicit from any of your goals or context in your life. That's what I think of as my purpose in life, is just to spend the rest of it exploring and discovering how to fulfill my values. And I can't imagine that there could be anything better than that. It's working really well. I can't think of what else are we here to do? And implied in that is also the fulfillment of your potential. One more thing about the acceptance and external validation: no one can validate for you what's important to you. That's a fact. When we start thinking that and we start putting that validation outside of ourselves, that is a wrong turn. It'll never be fulfilling. You'll never be able to get enough validation from other people to feel validated for yourself. Your values are generalizations about experiences that are important to you. Only you can know what is most important to you. Only you can validate that. When it comes to other people, consider their responses to you as feedback, not validation. They cannot validate what's important to you. Their responses to you, whether intentional or not, or whether directed at you or not, is feedback. So if someone comes to you and you believe you're a kind person, and this person comes to you and they say, you're not kind, you're cruel, that person doesn't get to determine whether or not that's true. They're giving you feedback. So it's up to you to take that feedback and say, okay, I will consider the information they're giving me. Maybe I'll ask for more information. What do you mean by that? What is it that I did that makes you say that? And then you consider their feedback. And if it's useful feedback, meaning there's some truth to it, this does not invalidate who you are. It doesn't invalidate what's important to you. It's just information for you to use to update it. Oh, okay, yeah, that was true. I thought I was being kind, but actually I wasn't. So now that I know that, I'm going to alter my behavior. Or the person might just be, they're having their own thing, their own bad day, something really bad might have happened to them, and they're taking it out on you. So once again, you're receiving it just as feedback, nothing else. You consider the feedback and you go, no, what they're saying does not really apply to me. It just doesn't connect. It doesn't make sense. And then you drop it and let it go. But in that process, never did you allow that person to validate or invalidate your experience or what's important to you. You're the only one who gets to do that. Make sure you're always maintaining that locus of control from within. And then everything else is feedback. And it's either useful feedback or it's not useful feedback. If it's useful, use it. If it's not useful, just drop it and move on.